Why don't you tell us who you are and where we are?
I'm Marco Liias, State Representative for the 21st District in Snohomish County, and we're standing on the steps of the Legislative Building in Olympia.
Let's talk a little about education.
Sure. We've got a lot of exciting things going on in education this year. Obviously, we've got a tough budget, but even in the midst of these tough economic times, we're having some good conversations about the direction that we want our schools to go in. The first piece we're talking about is how we fund basic education, and more importantly, what is defined as part of a basic education. So we had a 2-year process, a task force that studied the issue, and they've come back now with a report about what should really be in that definition of basic education. The last time the state updated the definition was in the late 70s, and as we all know, our definition of what is a good education has changed a lot over the last 30 years. So we're really taking a look at, should early learning be part of that? How should we tie in connections to higher education, to community colleges, and then what kind of classes do we expect students to take today versus what they expected in the late 70s? And really a lot more math and science are important today as we live in this technological society. So how do we define the basic education properly, and then how do we fund it, since we're looking at increasing the requirements for kids? How do we make sure that schools have the funding to make sure that we can deliver that education?
And speaking of requirements, what's this about some students not being able to graduate because they didn't take the WASL?
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma. You know, a couple of years ago, the state legislature said that students don't have to pass the math WASL as a graduation requirement. But when the legislature did that, they said if a student didn't pass the math WASL, they had to continue to take math classes, and then they had to continue to take the WASL. Well, not every school district passed that message along in a clear way, and so some of our students have continued to take math classes, but they didn't take the WASL again. They didn't ever have to pass it, they just had to continue to retake the test. And so really what we've decided is that it's unfair to hold those kids from graduating just because they didn't go in and literally fill one bubble on the test and leave, which would have fulfilled the requirement. But they have continued to take math classes, they've passed all of their classes, they've met the other requirements, and so this bill would let them off the hook for that last technical requirement to retake the test every year, since not every student has done that at this point.
Is the legislature doing anything to address the achievement gap?
You know, that's a good question. The achievement gap is sort of a technical term for the idea that there are students in different communities, communities of color, that don't do as well in school as some of our non-Hispanic white students do. If you look at student performance on the WASL, for example, kids that are from African American communities or that are from Latino communities don't do as well as our kids in, like I said, non-Hispanic white communities. And so really trying to understand why those disparities exist and tackle them is an ongoing challenge. And my bill would create an ongoing work group to review these issues and make recommendations to our superintendent of public instruction, so that we will continue to focus on this issue and really strengthen our commitment to every kid in Washington getting a good education.
You have introduced what's being called the anti-bullying bill. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, you know, as you look at reasons why kids don't do well in school, one of the biggest reasons is harassment and intimidation at school. Particularly, you know, middle school, high school, you start to get the social cliques and the socialization at school, and unfortunately some kids get left behind. Some kids get treated differently because they're different. Maybe they have a disability, maybe they're a gay or lesbian teen in our schools. And so this bill would strengthen our commitment to creating respectful learning communities and saying that when you come to school, you should be treated with respect by your peers and by the school personnel. And it really fits into my commitment to take care of all kids in our schools and make sure that every kid has an equal chance to learn, regardless of whether they're rich or poor, whether they're black, white, or some other color, or whether they have a disability or not. Every kid should come to school and find a respectful, supportive environment where they can learn. And this anti-harassment, anti-bullying will further that goal.
I'm concerned about the effect of the budget crisis on education.
I think we all are. You know, we know that we have a record state deficit. We know that education is one of the core priorities of the state. And really, it's a question of how do we fund our priorities in education while continuing to fund our priorities in other areas of the budget. Health care is an example, or continuing to fund our public safety efforts. And so that's why I'm putting together a community conversation on education to bring the community together like I did last year to give me your thoughts on ways that we can fund the priorities, fund the things that are important to our community, and really hear about what are our priorities together. So there'll be more information on those, the date for that community conversation, and I think I'll probably do a couple of other community meetings and town halls to get citizens' views and input on the important issues we're facing and the decisions we're going to make. So those will be available shortly on my website, and also we'll be doing some postcard mailers to folks to let them know when those meetings are taking place and where and how they can get involved.
You have a busy day today?
Busy day, yes. We're still in committee. This is the last week before every committee has to pass its bills out for consideration. It's our policy cutoff. And so we are getting close to some of the deadlines, and everyone's in a frenzy to get things passed out of committee and on to further consideration. So a lot of meetings, but a lot of good work we're doing for the citizens of Washington.
All right, let's get back to work.
That's right. Thanks.